Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, the podcast about comedy with me, your host, Mark Ducano. This podcast has 5 stars on Spotify at time of recording. If you like it, maybe you'll give it 5 stars too. And if you don't like it, don't give it 1 star, just ignore it and hope it goes away. A policy I use to great effect on my marriage. I love talking to the people in comedy about comedy. If you like to hear what they have to say as much as I do, then please like, subscribe, rate, review and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is another rising star in comedy with a debut hour at this year's Edinburgh Fringe. With her comedy informed by an international upbringing and a career in advertising, she is charismatic, stylish, sassy and very, very funny. It's stand-up comedian Bronwyn Sweeney.
Let's crack on. Let's do it.
Okay, so straight away, you've got your name, Welsh-Irish, born in Blackpool, and yet, as you wonderfully put it, you present American. So what is the origin story there?
Oh, great. Yeah. I mean, the origin story is I was born in Blackpool to an Irish father and a Zimbabwean mother, all the way back in 1986. My dad thinks that the name Bronwyn is an Irish name, but I can confirm anything with a win or that sounds remotely Middle Earthian is definitely Welsh. So that's just my name. We've all got kind of Irish names, me and my siblings. But I was born in Blackpool, but we moved around with my dad's job. He was an engineer. So after Blackpool, I moved to a place called Darlington in the north of England. Then I moved to Athens, Greece, and I went to an international American school. And that is where the accent first started to kind of morph into something not English. I think it's like, I don't know why it's an American international. It was an American international school. So I think the default accent tends to be American.
Yeah.
And I didn't get made fun of. I think people were mostly just fascinated by the British accent, but I remember consciously trying to kind of sound like everyone else. Right. You know, I remember the day that like I came home and called my mom like mom, and she was like, all right, whatever, like just let her do it, you know. And then we ended up staying in Greece for almost 6 years. So you know, the accent fully morphed into kind of like American. And then I went to high school in Florida. Right. And that's where it kind of like solidified.
Yeah.
But that's it. Yeah. So just, I don't know. And I've been living in London for 14 years now. And like, I thought that my accent would change a little, but I kind of feel like I've picked a lane and I just need to stick with it. Because I don't want to be one of those people with like a half English accent, start speaking with that like distracting upward inflection, you know what I mean? Like, all right, everyone, should we go to the pub? Like, I don't know, it just like Madonna, who I love Madonna. I don't know why I said that, but you know what I mean? Like, I think you just kind of have to, yeah.
Do you find it helps your comedy to have an American accent in England or hinders?
Oh God. I mean, I think for me, I mean, I probably have an insecurity about it only because the accent, and this is what like my show is about. It's like my accent, I feel British on the inside. I sound American on the outside. And I weirdly think the American accent became like a, like armor. Do you know what I mean? When I first started doing comedy, I didn't know what like my persona was on stage or like my tone of voice. And I feel like I was so nervous. I sounded more American on stage. I don't know if it was this like, if you just come out loud and brash, you know, then it was kind of like faking it till I made it, I suppose. And I feel like my onstage persona became like this upward, you know, like high volume American person. And then I couldn't get out of it. I couldn't slip back to like how I normally am. So it's helpful in that I think it makes me come across more confident than I am. But I think it hinders my comedy in the sense that I always have to address it. Like, I feel like I can't just come on and do a set about, I don't know, like some of the things I want to talk about because I feel like I have to address my accent all the time. I have to let the audience know that I'm not what they think I am. I don't know.
Right.
And sometimes I wish I didn't have to bother. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you could always flip it the other way and use it as a defense. You know, if you don't get the jokes, it's because some of it got my American humor.
Exactly. Oh, it does help. I have a joke in my set in my show about how it's a lot easier to play dumb, like when you have an American accent, like because there's huge, like I have really big cultural gaps from moving around a lot. Like I feel like I went to university in Italy and I didn't have internet the whole time I was there in my flat. I was there from like 2003 to like 2008. And I feel like, you know, there's parts of like American culture I don't get because I wasn't living there. And then there's parts of British culture like I don't get. So I'll be doing like a pub quiz with my friends and they'll be like, oh, you lived in America, like you should know this. And I'll be like, oh, there goes the slide. And I genuinely don't know it. Or there'll be like a TV show that everyone in England watched. And I was like, no, don't know it, So just, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've touched on a lot of things already, but let's dial it right back again and find out, when did comedy become a part of your life? How did that become something you became aware of?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I would say, to be fully honest, I think I was always kind of like a funny kid. I liked performing. And I remember vividly, I was living in the US. I was in high school in the US, and my basketball coach passed away, sadly. And we were at her funeral. I was about 15 years old. And I remember everyone was going up and making these really sad, as you do, it was a funeral, right? Like, everyone was having sad things to say. And I remember having really funny memories of this coach. And I don't know what came over me. I was like, I just feel like I need to break the tension here. And I wasn't like an outgoing kid in high school. If anything, I was pretty shy. And something just compelled me to get up there and talk at this funeral to like a really big room. And I told a funny story and everyone laughed.
Yeah.
And I remember just thinking like, this is so powerful and gratifying and special that like, number one, that I can make random people in a room laugh, but it felt really cathartic. And I think that was the first little seed that planted in my head that, oh, like you are funny and you can make people laugh and you can use this as like a power. And then for years, I didn't do anything with it. And then I talk a lot about working in advertising. And I think in advertising, there's a lot of overlap with comedy because you're often presenting ideas to people who don't know you, who can decide not to listen to you or pay attention. And, if you can get their attention within the first few seconds. And the agency that I was working at the time gave everyone money to go spend on a passion project.
Right.
And I thought, if I'm not paying for it, I'll go do a comedy course. And I did this weekend comedy course. It was like 2 days and I was dreadful. Like I wasn't funny. I couldn't translate writing ads into writing jokes. Like I didn't know how to do it. And I did the showcase and like I still have the video on my phone. Like the jokes were really, you could see the setup, like they're like, hey, what's the deal with, like airport security, so cringe. And I was like, oh, no, I didn't get the bug like everyone talks about. And I left it alone for years, like a year, I'd say. And then I went to go watch a friend at an open mic night from the course. And like, she was good, but like, I was like, hang on, I kind of feel like if I try this again, I could do that. If I go away and I write the things that I actually want to talk about, not what like a course taught me to talk about.
Yeah.
And that was like 8 years ago, but I've always been like very slow on the open mic. I'm a very slow learner. I was just like, I didn't like, it was just something for fun. It was a side hustle.
Yeah.
And I don't think I started taking it seriously until lockdown. Like, I realized, oh, I kind of miss this thing. And I have things I want to say and things I want to talk about. Yeah. And I entered the Funny Women Awards, like on a whim. And, I did terribly in competitions. I was like, oh, I don't care anymore. And I think maybe the not caring is what helped because somehow I did really well in that. And I think that was my sign. It was like, okay, maybe you're not terrible at this. Maybe you should keep going. So I feel like I've been doing it for 8, but seriously for about 2 years.
Right. Okay. You say about you didn't take it really seriously until lockdown. So what was it about lockdown? What was it about the restrictions or your environment at that time that made you suddenly decide, okay, I need to knuckle down and make this a focus now that I can't physically?
Oh, I want anything I can't have. You tell me I'm not allowed to do something and that's when I want to do it. And I think that was it. I think I just had so much. It was the first time. I was very fortunate and I still feel very grateful that my lockdown experience, I kept my full-time job. Money was not a stress for me. And I think that allowed my brain to relax and kind of think about comedy for fun for once. Yeah. And I had kind of just cobbled together my favorite bits. And when the pubs reopened for a bit, there's this comedy night in London called The Blackout. And it's just, it's like a gong show. And I bombed at it years before and I was never going back there again. And then I went on like a Tinder date, I think, with another comedian. And he was so nice. And he was just like, that's the only gig that's going to make you better, right? Like you have to go do it because there's a big crowd. You know what I mean? It forces you to think on your feet. And I remember just going, I think he's right. So I signed up for the next one and I took those bits of material and I ended up beating the clock. And from that, I got a video. And I think just, yeah, there was something in lockdown that clicked. I thought, I just can't stop writing and thinking about it. So that must mean something, and the fact that, we were going through a really terrible time in the world, and the thing that I wanted to do was stand up, I think it meant something.
So once you decided that you were going to go serious and really sort of put the effort into it, what did you expect? What was it about comedy that surprised you as a career?
I mean, comedy's it's constantly surprising. I mean, my expectations have always been quite, I don't know. I think I'm one of those people who I there's no in between for me. It's like all or nothing, and I feel like I either want to be like the most successful person at something I'm doing, or I don't want to do it. But I think with comedy, what's so nice is you realize there's so many people out there doing it, and everyone's got their own story. And I think for me, I used to be, I wouldn't say competitive with other comedians. I think it was more just that scarcity mindset that like, oh, does the world need another American woman talking about like her dating life? And then suddenly I was like, yeah, but so what? Like like you have your way of telling stories, and they're just as valid as everyone else. So just keep going with it. And I think what changed in my mind was giving myself permission to go, your stories are valid to talk about too. And you don't have to be the best at this. Like you don't have to, because there is no real measurement of best, I don't think, with comedy. I think for me, it's like, can I go out there and do a gig and be proud of what I said? And did it resonate with a couple people in the audience? Cool. To me, like that's successful. And I think what's nice about comedy now is I'm just kind of rolling with it. I knew that Fringe was something I was going to do. So for me, I was like, okay, that's the focus. I have nothing else that I need to worry about. I don't need to worry about trying to audition for anything. I don't want to be on TV. I don't want to become TikTok famous. I just want to work on this hour and make it an hour show that I'm proud of delivering,
Yeah. So when you think back now to that first gig, what was going through your mind before you do comedy for the first time?
Oh God. I think I'm a bit delusional. Like, I think I really thought I was going to get up there and like crush. And what surprised me was how nervous I was.
Yeah.
I felt sick. I remember I only had about 3 minutes worth of material, and it felt like an eternity, So I don't know if it's the way I learned to do stand-up was to write it all down and rehearse it. I wasn't one of those comedians who could like jot down a punchline and find their way to it on stage live. Like I hate silence. So that first stand-up gig, I was so nervous. I was like, will there ever be a time when I won't hate the moment before performing? Which I thought was odd, like that I actually did not enjoy that moment at all.
Wow. And what about now?
I still get really nervous.
Yeah.
Like, and that's the thing. It's like, but again, in doing it for so long now and realizing that everyone's got their own, for lack of a, like, I know this is such a wanky word, but like everyone's on their own journey with it. And I think, for me, the way I learned to do comedy was write my stuff down and rehearse it. And it might not be the smartest way to learn how to do something, but it works for me. It makes me feel like I've got some sense of control, but I think it's still something I don't get as nervous as I used to. Like there were times, and that I think has a lot to do with why I was so slow to get into it at the beginning, because I just dreaded it so much. Like I would do one open mic night every like 2 weeks and go, like, wasn't that so brave? And then I would look at other people on social media who were doing like 5 gigs a week. And I was like, how are they doing this? But then I realized like the more you do it, the better it gets. And I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. So I get nervous now mostly because I want it to go well. And I realized, as someone with like a history of anxiety, like that anxiety, sometimes it's hard to distinguish whether it's good or bad. But like a lot of the times I'm nervous because I'm excited. I'm not nervous because I'm dreading it, let's say.
Right. You talked a little bit about competitions, and you mentioned Funny Women. Obviously, there's a BBC New Comedian you entered, and then you've mentioned things like the Blackout, Gong shows, and what have you. How do you feel about competitions in general?
Before Funny Women, I would have been like, you know what? I don't think competitions are good. But, I think because I did terribly in them. I think I am forever grateful to Funny Women because it has changed my life. So in my experience, you know, and it's my personal experience, I think competitions are really helpful. I mean, they can be, right? Not for everyone, but I understand that what they do is they can, you know, open your network. You can meet people through them. They can give you a platform that you just simply would not get from hustling on the open mic scenes. I think they can be validating as much as they are disheartening and soul destroying, right?
Yeah.
And for the first years that I tried to enter them, I didn't do well in them, but looking back now, I really don't think I was ready. Do you know what I mean? That's just my own experience.
Yeah.
I think they can be great. I think the only time they're not great is if you start to judge yourself by how well, if that's the only metric you have for your success. Because I think there are ways to be successful in comedy without the competitions, and plenty of people are, but they can really help you.
Yeah. What about the kind of comedian that you are? I mean, you mentioned it a little bit earlier on, but do you see yourself as an observational comedian, as a storyteller? What about the style of comedy that you do drew you to it? Why not characters, that sort of thing?
I mean, storytelling is my thing. I love it's where I feel comfortable, because I think life is full of, I think for one, it was just the way I gravitated to telling stories. That was my kind of comedy. I was like, this funny thing happened to me. How can I tell a bunch of people about it? That's just my style. That's what I'm compelled to do. I think because my life also is confusing to people, I find I need to wrap it up into a story to make sense for people. Like at least I haven't figured out how to write zingy one-liners about my identity yet, but that's maybe a challenge for myself. But you know, with my friends, I've always just enjoyed telling stories, and that's the kind of comedy that I enjoy, which is hard and I think, again, that's why I struggled in the beginning, because 5 minutes is not a lot of time. You know what I mean? Really, in the grand scheme of things. And my style of comedy, there's a long runway. Do you know what I mean? Before we take flight. And I really, really enjoy telling the long stories, you know. And I think the audiences that enjoy my comedy like to come on that, you know, like trip with me. I'm not the kind of I'm not like a, you know, punny, you know, laugh a minute. Well, I hope there's a laugh a minute, but a lot of dead air if there's not. I don't know. It's just like my family. We all like to sit around and tell stories. Like I always joke that like I'm the least funny out of my siblings, but I'm the most but I work hard because I'm the second sibling. You know what I mean? I was the middle child for a long time. So, you know, like my sister and brothers are way funnier than me, but I think we're just a family of storytellers, you know?
Yeah. And also you said about dedication to the writing. What about improv? How much does improvising on the spot play in your comedy?
Oh my God. For the longest time, I mean, I will hands up admit that like I am not a fast thinker. Like anywhere in my life, I am deer in the headlights. Like, do not ask me to do something on the spot. Like I will freeze. And even when I worked in advertising, if anyone ever came up to my desk and they were like, "Hey, can you give me a line for this?" I would just sit there and go, "No, you've got to go away and like give me a moment." Like I don't like that. And again, like I was always in awe of comedians who could think fast, adapt to like the crowd. I was not that kind of comedian because because the way I had learned to do stand-up was to stay on script. So I was not prepared to go off script. But I think what I learned is the more comfortable you get in your material, the more you do it, the more things don't throw you off. If an audience member says something to you or you get a little heckle, like you can go off piste and come back to it. But I think in the beginning, I was so nervous that anything that threw me off, I couldn't improvise. But now, the more comfortable I've gotten in my material, I would say it's really helped me kind of relax. And when I relax, I do find I say funny stuff off the cuff, and I'm like, oh shit, like that was funny.
Yeah.
You know, for me, like I had to learn how to relax on stage because I really wasn't. I was so uptight.
Yeah, I know what you mean about being thrown off, because if a comedian stops the show and asks me, "Hey, what's your name?" Like I don't know. I've completely it's just gone.
Forget. Like who am I? And I mean, I remember some advice I got. I went to go like watch a show, and a friend of mine was emceeing, and she was so good at crowd work. And I just sat there and I was like, "How'd you do it?" And she said to me afterwards, she was like, "Yeah, but I wasn't always like." She said, "Comedy is always about leveling up, right?" You get really good at one thing and then you've got to climb to the next thing. So, and I was like, oh, she's absolutely right, because you do your 5 minutes, you get really good at that 5, then you're ready for your 10.
Yeah.
Then you get really good at 10, and then 15 minutes, is a new thing you've got to learn. And, with emceeing, I mean, I'm not very good at it. I've emceed a few times now, but she was right. I was like, okay, let me see if I can learn how to do this. So I've emceed a few times with mixed results.
Yeah.
Again, I'm just not good at thinking on the fly. All the jokes come to me later. Like when I'm walking home or sitting on the tube, I'm like, I could have said that. But I think the more you do something, obviously it's a muscle, right? So what I'm enjoying now as I do more and more, longer sets, is that you can afford to kind of go, yeah, things can occur to you in the spot, when your brain is relaxed a bit. But I say that now, but
also, because of your travels in the UK, in Greece, in America, what's your experience of comedy culturally? How people approach it and how people perhaps experience your comedy?
Oh my gosh. I mean, like, I always think about the different kinds of comedy. I mean, I guess I can only really think about comedy I know, which is, British, American. And I would watch, when I lived in Italy for a while, and I always loved how when I finally learned to speak Italian, like watching Italian, I guess comedy, stand-up wasn't really a thing there when I was living there, but it's become really big. But I liked how physical their comedy was, and it was a very different style of comedy versus, British comedy is very dry, very witty, very sharp, and I love it. Like, I grew up watching a lot of kind of British sketch. I think we all did, right? Like British sketch show comedy and character work, which I just loved. Everything from like Monty Python to Catherine Tate was just, to me, hysterical. And then American comedy, I remember watching like Eddie Murphy with my parents. Do you know what I mean? Which had a completely different feel to it. I've never done stand-up in the US, but I think I probably, would say my style is a mixture of British and American. Like I can be very self-deprecating. I can be a bit dry, but I also think, I can fall into a rhythm of being, like confident and cool on stage too.
Yeah.
But I think obviously with, streaming now, everyone is getting influenced by everyone, right? The styles are kind of merging a little bit.
Right.
I would say. Did that answer your question? I feel like I just talked about
yeah, sure.
Interpreted it my own way and then went off on a tangent.
That's what every great guest does. Answer the question you wanted to be asked.
I was like, listen, I hear what you said. I'm just going to ignore it and talk about what I want to talk about.
Yeah, very political. Well, you mentioned influences there. So what are the more direct influences upon your own comedy? Is there anyone who actually inspires you?
Oh, gosh. I mean... like it's so many. Like I remember, like I said, Eddie Murphy Raw. I mean, he was 21 when he did Raw, I think, or something really young like that. But then I mentioned like people like Catherine Tate. Like I don't know. I'm like in awe of their ability to do impressions,
right?
And observe life and then play it back. But then I also have grown up watching the Netflix comedian. I mean, I guess that they wouldn't call themselves Netflix comedians, but that's where I saw them. Like the Ali Wongs, Eliza Schlesinger. Those kinds of really cool, confident women who I think are able to talk about their life, but also be, I don't know, like they inspire me because they just seem so confident and they can really make fun of what it feels like to be a woman of a certain age and, the modern day. But then I'll look at someone like James Acaster and just go, your brain, how do you think like that? And I love it. Do you know what I mean? And I think weirdly, like I don't watch loads of comedy. I would say like when I was younger, I watched more, but I'm a very absorbent person.
Right.
It's a bit like my writing. Like if I read, a couple books by one author, I find I start to like write. It's like I adopt their mannerisms, their writing style. And I found that in my early comedy days, I didn't want to watch a lot of comedy because I remember on the circuit, I would see people and I would go, oh, I can see that you're doing like your best Ricky Gervais impression. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like you are Jimmy Carr. And I get it. In the early, it's fine because, art repeats itself and what is original anymore. But I just found that for my own protection, I was like, don't watch too much comedy. I really wanted to work on what my voice is, what's my persona on stage, and just feel like, where does my voice go when it's not influenced by anyone?
Right.
But now, I mean, I think because yeah, like in the run up to Fringe, I watched a lot of hour shows just to understand how people structured theirs. And
Yeah.
instead of being inspired, I was just like, ugh, like I'll never be that good. So I stopped watching them. I was overwhelmed by everyone's talent. And then I was like, what do I have to bring to the table? And then I lay down.
Well, I'll ask you what you're bringing to the table in a moment, but just first of all, in regard to watching comedy, I understand that you talk about there about watching it from an analytical perspective. Are you able to not watch it as a comedian? Are you able to be entertained still?
I think less so now. No, I think now, I mean, I was about to compare myself to like a chef eating another restaurant. Like I have any experience in that. I don't. I think it's because I'm watching this show about cooking. So now everything relates to food. But I can't help it. Like I'll look at, when I watch comedy now, I'm like, wow, look how she set that joke up. Look how he, you know what I mean? Like told that story. Or I like how he, how he walked on the stage. Or yeah, I think now everything's analytical. I'm just watching it from a place of like awe, jealousy, and like I think when I was in Fringe last year, I went to go see Stuart Lee, and yeah, same thing. I think I just left like overwhelmed by his talent, and I was like, well, that's cool. Great. You know what I mean?
So tell me about your show then that you're taking to Edinburgh, your debut hour.
Oh my gosh. Every time people say debut, I feel like I want to like curtsy or I don't know, just like show up in like a ball gown. Like it's so funny. Yeah, my show is called Off Brand. And basically it's because I worked in advertising for so long. It's a big part of my life. It's how I look at the world. I was very good at it. And I felt like I wanted to poke fun at that in a way, but also talk about my life. So Off Brand, what it is my realization that I'm very good at selling things. I could sell everything. In my career, I sold so many things. But what I realized in comedy is I really struggle to sell myself. I didn't know how to turn that gaze back on myself and go, okay, how do I package myself up into a product that makes sense to people?
Yeah.
Like I said, I really struggle with my identity. And, I feel like, products are like jokes, right? Like ads are just like jokes. You've got seconds to get someone's attention, for them to understand what you're about, what you're selling, what you bring for them, how you can make their life better. And in advertising, people will just skip past your ad or close the tab or go make a cup of tea. And in comedy, it's the same thing. You can feel an audience not like you or not warm to you.
Yeah.
And like I said, I've only got seconds to kind of explain who I am. And this show was finally me going, okay, you've got an hour. You've got an hour to talk about your life. And there's so many things about you that people wouldn't know, right? And I feel like because when I was doing comedy before, I only had 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So I would always go for the easiest gag, the lowest hanging fruit. Okay, let's make fun of my American accent. But actually, you get to know me, and this accent is a product of so many different countries. And actually, I may sound like this, but I have had these other life experiences. So the show is me going, okay, let me look at my brand.
Yeah.
Look at what is the brand of Bronwyn. Do you know what I mean? And what can you learn from this branding exercise that I've done for myself?
Yeah.
And, spoiler alert, we may learn something about ourselves towards the end of the show that, about human nature and my thoughts on branding.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I like to ask comedians how much of the real them we see on stage. So as a branding exercise, are we seeing the real product? What you're advertising of yourself on stage? Is that what we can expect from you?
I think so. Well, I mean, is it false advertising? I would say slightly, in that I've kind of sold the show as a kind of way to teach yourself how to brand yourself, but really it's a show about my life.
Yeah.
So okay, slightly, maybe there's some fine print and T's and C's that should have been on the poster. But I would say you're getting Bronwyn, like the comedian and like the performer. I think I am telling really stories that are really fundamental to who I am. Like, I open up about my history of anxiety disorder. I've had panic attacks since I was a kid. They were a really big part of my life, and there's never a chance to talk about that. I moved to Italy when I was 17, not just because I loved Italian culture, but because I was obsessed with a football player. Like, I don't know, like you wouldn't guess that about me. You know what I mean? Like I have like I said, I think I come across as a confident person, but actually you get to know me and I am confident in certain ways, but I'm also just this 37-year-old woman who wants to stay inside and like eat cheese. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't really want to do it. Like, I'm not this super driven, motivated person that I come across. Like, I like staying inside and doing nothing. Like, that's what I've learned about myself. I think, so I think it's a story that has like, like it's a bit confessional. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I debated when I was doing the show. I know everyone's debut is kind of like biographical. And I was like, oh, should I talk about something more important? Should I try to make a statement about, I don't know, the state of the world or, but I thought, no, it's my first hour and I really want to use the space and the time to introduce myself because I feel like I've always felt so guilty about, explaining my life to people. Like when you're a third culture kid, the worst question someone can ask you is like, where are you from? Because you're like, oh God, how much time do you have? And I feel bad that like, it's not a quick answer and it doesn't make sense to people. And I feel bad that they have to sit and listen to my life story. But I felt like with the show, it was like, no, like this is your life. And, you shouldn't feel bad about it. It's your experience. And even if you haven't lived in 5 countries, there are elements from it that are relatable, I think. You know what I mean? Whether it's society, whether it's you chased a man that you had never met to a foreign country, like as a weird, horny teenager. Like, sure, we all did that.
So do you have expectations from Edinburgh Fringe? You've done it before?
So last year I did thank God I was persuaded just to go and like dip my toes in the water. So last year I did like a split bill 1 week and it overwhelmed me. And I'm so glad that was my introduction because like I said, I'm a sensitive little soul. I like to go to bed same time every night. I like to get 8 hours of sleep and eat well and exercise. And suddenly you're in Fringe and it's this overwhelming place where, I don't know, like time doesn't exist and neither did like green vegetables. I don't know. It was a lot. I found it like I was so inspired every day, but also so tired. Like I said, I wish I could be someone who was cool enough to be like, yeah, I'm at Fringe. Like I love every moment, but the highs were so high, but the lows were so low. Like, bombing to a room of 8 people for half an hour. You're like, why am I doing this? And I take things very personally. But this year, I think my expectations are, initially I was like, I want to go up there. I want to like win loads of awards, get loads of recognition. And then I was like, what are you talking about? Like, no, you don't. I think like, again, awards are like competitions. It's like, of course, the recognition would be amazing. It would be nice to get that validation of someone going, hey, we think this thing that you spent a lot of time working on is really good. But then I also know that it's dangerous to look at that as the metric of success. And again, luckily my career in advertising prepared me in the way that like sometimes the best ads aren't the ones that like won awards, but they're the ones that people talk about. And I think with my show, it's important for me. I'm probably just like giving myself advice out loud right now, which is that like awards would be nice, but I think what I really want to get out of it is to like survive doing this thing for a month. I'll be really proud of myself. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it takes real stamina to go anywhere and do a show at the same time every day for an hour for 28 days. Like for me, like success is just making it to the end, like in one piece, but let's see what happens. I think, maybe lower my expectations and that'll be good. Then I can't be disappointed, but
we'll see when you're there.
I guess it's like, everyone, I remember walking around last year and seeing all the 4 stars on the posters. And I was like, God, will that be me one day? But like I said, reviews are nice when they're nice, but God, like when they're bad, it's soul destroying, And I think I just want to get through each day and know that like I went out there and I did the best I could, And I remember doing a gig last year at Fringe. It was a late night gig at I think it was called Spank. It's like I think it was their last year doing it, and I was just so grateful to be there. I was so happy to be in a room full of people. And the comedian that went before me was this really awesome Canadian guy, and like he crushed, And I remember thinking like, oh God, like he just did so well. What are they going to make him like another American woman who's going to get up there and talk about her vibrator for 10 minutes. Like, is that what they want? And like, I did really well. Like, I got laughs and it was great. And afterwards I went to the toilet and these like 4 girls came up to me and they were like, oh my God, like, we're obsessed with you. We love you. You're our favorite person of the night. And it's not that like you need that every time at a gig to remind yourself that you're doing okay. But I think it was nice to go, oh yeah, like my material resonated with the people it was supposed to resonate with. And that is really important,
Yeah. You talked about there a little bit about feedback. Also, you mentioned hecklers earlier. How do you respond to people who either shout out in the room or who come up to you after the show with comments, suggestions, or just sharing the love? How do you respond to those kinds of people?
Oh God, I'm still learning how to be honest.
Yeah.
I think maybe the spaces that I've been performing in are really, I think really warm and I have very well-behaved audiences. I think obviously the more you do it, if the more club nights I'll do, the less I can depend on, a well-behaved audience. Because I've heard horror stories, do you know what I mean? And I've definitely I've done a couple gigs on like a Saturday night in central London, and you can feel them getting feral. Like I said, it's helpful to have an American accent because I think I get on stage so confidently they all quiet down. So I'm lucky that I can raise the volume of my voice and it commands the room a little bit. But I've been heckled a couple times. Like sometimes just people feel like they can talk to you in the middle of a show and you're like, what are you doing? And I never want to be mean, but at the same time, sometimes you do have to shut people down. So I often just try to acknowledge them for a moment, like, hey, I get it. No, I know, that's great. And then try to get back on with the show.
Yeah.
Or I'll try to tell someone like, I love your enthusiasm, but like, and try to tell them just to be quiet. But I think my problem is like, I'm still learning how to go off piste. And I found like one night I hosted a show and there were these really loud guys in the back. And I just went mean, and I don't know why. That's not in my nature, but I think I was so irritated by them because they were so loud that I think I said something like, hey, like what's happening in the back over there? And I think a more seasoned MC would have been able to kind of coax them into like, I don't know, but I just feel like I went mean teacher on them instead of actually, I don't know, dealing with them in the right way. And then it alienated the room. So I guess the answer is I'm still learning. And as for, the comment about feedback, it's funny. You get people coming up to you and they'll say the nicest things, or you'll get people who come up and go, wow, I don't normally like female comedians. I don't normally like Americans, but you were really good. And you're like, okay, thanks, I guess. That's not a compliment. You know what I mean? And it mostly comes from women, which is weird. But like, again, I think I've just been really lucky. Like I've never had anyone say anything mean. I mean, when I did that Blackout gig years ago and I bombed, I went outside to have a cry because I cry all the time. And some guy came up to me and was like, hey, I thought you were really good. And that was worse. I was like, go away. I don't need your pity. I just need to go like sit on the tube and like stare out the window and think about my life. But learning, it's a learning curve, right?
Yeah. So what then have been the best and worst gigs so far? Let's do with the worst so you can get it and then end on the positive.
Oh God. I mean, the worst gig. Let's see. There's so many. I mean, I've got 2. All right. The first one was I was, still working in advertising and I had a shoot all the way in Peckham. And then I had signed up to a gig in Camden and there was tube strikes that day.
Yeah.
And like, I'm the kind of person, like if I say I'm going to do your gig, I'm doing it. I don't bail unless I really am ill or like cannot make it. And I really probably just should have not gone to this gig because logistically it was a nightmare, but I was like, I'm going to do it. And I had to sit on a bus for like 2.5 hours to get from Peckham to Camden. And it was like chaos. Like the bus just stopped halfway through the journey. I had to get off and try to get back on. And, it was just horrible. And I'd been at a shoot all day and I was tired and hungry. I hadn't eaten. And I got to this gig and there were like 4 people there. And like the host was not great. And the audience, if you could call them that, was like 3 American tourists who'd wandered upstairs and then 1 drunk guy. And I just sat there and I was like, why? And I know it's not like the material itself didn't go badly, but I remember just thinking like, you have got to learn to set some boundaries. Like, you need to know when is, it's okay to say that you can't do something because it's not worth your time. You know what I mean? And like, this one drunk guy just kept piping up. The minute I walked on to, I would say stage, it wasn't stage. It was a microphone in the middle of the floor. He was like, "Oh, you're American. Are you a Trump fan?" And I was like, what? No. So that was annoying. And then I think the other bad one I would have to say was last year when I was doing my split bill. I was still definitely finding the flow of the show. It was our third night, and I had done that gig the night before at Spank, and it had gone well. And I ended up going back to sit down, and I ended up sitting next to Stuart Lee, who I told you was like one of my comedy idols. And he said to me, "Well done, mate." And I was like, "Oh my God, Stuart Lee just saw me do well. This is incredible." And I was doing my split bill in the basement at the Stand in Edinburgh, and he was doing his show upstairs in like the big theater room.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, I recognize your face from the posters. You're at the Stand. I'll come to you." And I was like, "Well." And then the next day we sold 7 tickets, and one of them was Stuart Lee. And he came in and he sat there, and I think I got like 4 laughs the entire like half hour. It was excruciating, like quiet, polite laughter, which is worse, I think, than no laughter. And you're just like very aware that like your hero is like watching you. And I just remember thinking like, oh my God, like time is a construct. Like every second felt like years. And I remember, everyone's like, "Oh, it's fine. He's probably been in those situations before." And I was like, I don't care. Like, it felt horrible.
Yeah.
It just felt shit. And then afterwards we went outside and he would like take a photo, and I was like, "Oh, well, at least you saw me yesterday do well." And he was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Yeah, I mean, I didn't have my hearing aids in, so I couldn't hear your set, but it looked like it went well." And I was like, "What?" So you didn't even like hear, you just, it was awful. That was my first like big cry to my mom. I think she called it like the worst moment. It was like, "How's it going?" And I was just like, awful, just awful. But, here we are, alive.
Yeah. What about the best?
I would say the best, so I mean, to this day, I have to say the Funny Women Awards, because that was my first time performing to that many people. It was a big theater in Bloomsbury. I had like, there was quite a few people, like, my brother and his boyfriend came, and I don't think they'd seen me do comedy in a while, and then like some friends. And I was, again, really nervous. And I think because when you get used to doing longer sets, 5 minutes actually doesn't feel, it's like, it's so fast. And it made me more nervous that I would somehow forget, my material because it was so short. And I got out there and I got the first laugh, and I remember relaxing into it and just going, "God, this is fun." Like, is this what it feels like to have that many people in a room laughing? Like, this is amazing. Because I'd only ever done kind of, I would say, like I said, open mic night rooms, which they're really hard to gauge if people like you. And it was just so gratifying. I had so much fun doing it. I loved my set. I loved the energy that the audience gave me. And I just felt like even if I hadn't come second, it was still one of the best experiences. So I loved it. And also, like, there's this great comedy club called the Bill Murray near Angel. And it's just such a great space. And the room is always full. And maybe because I don't know if it's just luck. I've never had a bad gig there. And I did there was one day like work had gone badly, and I went to do like a 10-minute set there, and I was tired and I just wanted to go home. And I got there, and I don't know, the room was just electric. I had done a joke. I make a joke about dating Australians, and the room was full of Australians. It was just, everyone was in it. And I just kind of left feeling like, oh gosh, I wish they could all be that great. I love it. Just I feel like when the stars align, like the audience are up for it, you find that weird reserve of energy at 9 o'clock. And
I asked you about what you wanted from Edinburgh, and you used the phrase earlier, metrics for success. Do you have ways of measuring your success? Do you have targets, objectives you want to achieve other than 5-star reviews, other than awards? Do you have like, oh, in 5 years from now, I want to be able to play this theatre, or do you have things like that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously one metric would be being able to live comfortably from like the income being, I think it's really hard. Do you know what I mean? And I've talked about this in things I've written about Fringe, and you know, I don't understand how people afford it. I really don't. Like, you know, so for me, success would be being able to live comfortably. You know, I'm a single independent woman, you know, I don't have any support, and it would be nice to make enough money that I could live comfortably from comedy. That would be great. I have dream, you know, for me, I don't dream of like packing stadiums. Like that doesn't feel intimate to me at all. I love the smaller, I say smaller, but you know, like 100, 200 people, like that to me would be ideal. Like success to me would be, I live in Crouch End, and you know, I've gone to see shows at like Alexandra Palace, like to be able to put on a show that I know people in the audience like my comedy and they're coming to see me, like doing that room, like that would be amazing. You know, of course I like dream of like live at the Apollo, but that's just because it just looks like such a fun gig. But and I would love to write a TV show. Like I would love to. That's initially like why I got into stand-up, is because I wanted to write a TV show about advertising, and I didn't know where to start. And I thought the fun, like stand-up comedy would be the best way to kind of force myself to do something and write and prove that I was funny. And then stand-up's kind of taken over. And like every other comedian now, I just have some dusty script sitting in a drawer somewhere, a digital drawer, a tab on my computer, but you know.
So what are the big lessons you've learned so far? What philosophies have you formed for going forward?
Oh, whoa, what a question. Life philosophies. The big one, this one is actually something I've thought about a lot, and it certainly applies to comedy too. I think, and I'm gonna like butcher my own thinking here. I think what I've learned from comedy is we are all raised in this, not all, but I think a lot of us are kind of brought up in this scarcity mindset that there's not enough room, right? For us. There's not enough jobs to go around, there's not enough partners in the world for us to find, there's not enough, you know what I mean? Like there's no space. And I think that is a lie. I think that there is enough to go around. And I think with comedy, especially, like I said in the beginning, I really didn't feel like there was room. You know, I felt like, oh, we already have, you know, a mixed race, curly haired American community, you know, so why do we need another one? You know, and then you realize, hang on, there's loads of people. And I mean this for men too. It's like the amount of male comedians I've heard say things like, well, I guess no one wants to hear from me. And I'm like, that's not true. Like, that's not true at all. People, everyone's story is valid. Whatever your experience, if you want to tell it, you just got to find the audience that wants to hear it, right? It's not an attack on you, and you will resonate more with some people and less with others. That's okay. Do you know what I mean? So I think one of my biggest life learnings is that, you know, again, is what does success look like, right? And is it the kind of accolades? Is it getting featured in lists and PR and press, or is it like how it makes you feel? And for me right now, like, you know, I know that I'm a slow learner. Like I don't, you know, but when I get something, I get it. Do you know what I mean? And I think I just have to like really be patient and trust in the pace of my life. You know what I mean? Like when I was starting out in the open mic scenes, like I said earlier, I would see people gigging all the time, right? And what's interesting to me is some of those people are debuting the same year as me, right? So we've all been doing it the same amount of time, and we've gone on our own separate journeys, but we've kind of come to this destination together, right? Whether that was from me, you know, keeping my full-time day job for as long as I could because I needed the money and I also liked my job, and not quitting, like I think was right for me. Do you know what I mean? And for the people who committed to comedy full-time, but they're still debuting the same year as me, that was right for them. So I think it's just really learning to kind of have faith in yourself and the timing of your life, and know that like things happen at the right moment and when they're supposed to. So, you know, like I said, I entered competitions a couple of years ago, and I never seemed to do well. And I think I just had to get comfortable, relax into my material. And that was when things changed for me, you know, and that's my own personal experience, and it can be different for someone else. So yeah, comedy is a great teacher of life. It really is.
Well, I'm going to ask you about that right now. But very briefly beforehand, how can we find out about you? How can we find out where to come and see you perform?
So you can find me on Instagram at Broncom. That's where I tend to post everything. It links to my website, bronwynsweeney.com, where you can buy tickets to my Fringe show. I'll be on at the Pleasance Courtyard, Bunker 3, every day at 3:20, except the 14th, because I will be lying in bed all day, recovering. I'm on Twitter. My Twitter got hacked annoyingly, so I lost all my followers and all my tweets, and I'm slowly rebuilding. I know, awful. So Instagram, the Broncom, or Broncom, Twitter, the Broncom, and my website, bronwynsweeney.com, to find tickets to any upcoming shows.
Fantastic. And finally, Bronwyn, the question I ask all of my guests, how would you sum up comedy in a nutshell?
Okay. I would say, in one word, it's necessary, right? I think we need it. I think it's necessary. I think comedy, because life is so hard and stressful and scary, it is an essential way to process the world and what we're going through, because laughter sometimes is the only way to get through it, you know? I'm not saying it's going to fix everything, but it really helps. So I find it like a very necessary art. For myself as a performer, it's necessary for me to process and get through, things that have happened to me in my life and laugh about them. I think for audience members, it's necessary because laughter really can help us get through what we're going through. And I think comedy gives us permission to talk about very serious topics and poke fun at things that otherwise we wouldn't be able to say or pay attention to. And so, in a nutshell, I think it's necessary and essential.
Bronwyn, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun.